and in the first week it had 4 million page views. It was just, it was one of those things. It was just the right time. There's the kind of thing that people were really interested in kind of at the time, because AI and kind of automation was a big concern. Kind of, I think it still is. And yeah, so it was on national TV, on like news reports in Canada and in France, and it was on radio and TV all over the country here in the States as well. And yeah, it did amazingly well. It did a lot of page views. I think we sold it 18 months after we actually launched it, just because we didn't know what to do with the site.
Hey, this episode of the Indie Worldwide podcast is brought to you by Founders Club. Once a week, I make introductions between indie founders from all around the world. There's currently over 150 founders participating, and I'd love for you to check it out too. Just head to indieworldwide.co/founders-club for the next 50 people-ish that sign up. The price is only $80 per year, and then it's going up, folks. So check it out, indieworldwide.co/founders-club. See you there.
All right. Welcome to the live stream, everybody. Welcome to Indie Worldwide. We have a special guest with us today. Mubs, as many of you already know. Where to even get started with Mubs, man? You ship so much. I don't even know. Let's see. 2016 Product Hunt Maker of the Year, for good reason. I think literally Mubs has probably shipped more discrete products than almost any other human being on Earth, just by sheer numbers. I have no idea how much revenue those make in aggregate. I have no idea even how many you've sold at this point, but just for sheer shippability.
Well, I think the sort of interesting thing is, and some people are usually quite surprised to hear it as well. So when I do list all of the things that I worked on, so yeah, I'm sure you've checked out my iworkedon.com profile. It has all of my projects listed on them, but everything I've listed on there is stuff that I did on the side. So while I've been doing all of that, I've also had a full-time job and shipped a lot more stuff that's not listed up there. So that's, I mean, it's funny because people, because often the sort of natural question is, well, how much money do you make, Mubs? And I'm like, well, with my side projects, I make a little bit, but not a lot, because I have a full-time job and I make more than enough money to cover my rent and everything with my full-time job. So I'm not really too concerned about making money from all of my side projects. Most of my side projects, I don't even try to make money. There's no ads on them. There's no way to pay to kind of use them or anything like that. So it's always a little bit of an interesting conversation when people start talking about my side projects there as well.
The follow-up question has to be, you crazy person, why do you do this?
Well, I mean, for me, it's basically, yes, I get paid to be a software developer, engineer, whatever you want to call it, but I like to do it. So it's, as well as being my full-time job, and it's also my hobby. It's also my interest. I love to play with new languages and new tools and new frameworks, and out of all those kind of things, and doing side projects is like an awesome way to kind of is kind of make that happen. I always say that you can't really know if you like a new tool, if a new tool is really any good until you use it for a real until you use it for a real application. And so with a lot of my experimentation and stuff, it's been, well, let's build a new application. and rather than just kind of making something and then just throwing it away, why not make something that hopefully other people actually want to use as well?
So how much of like one project to the next is carried over in terms of like code reused, and how much is starting from scratch to try some completely new paradigm out or some completely new tool?
I don't tend to share our code between projects, other than, I use the same, frameworks, whether it was Ruby on Rails or Laravel, for PHP projects, and there's like a lot of packages and things that you kind of use from project to project itself. Most of the sort of code I write for the projects themselves are usually pretty clean and pretty custom for each of the applications on top of that. But now, like I said, there's a lot that the frameworks offer you these days that saves you a lot of time. Like I don't have to build user registration, user login, user sign up. I forgot my password. I don't have to build any of that stuff. And so so there's really I try and focus on, okay, what's the core code for this particular application. And most of that is very specific to the thing that I'm actually working on. Are you
using a custom code you've built for things like users and authentication, using some pre-built tool?
No, so like I said, with Laravel, it ships with a couple of things that you can just kind of run to kind of generate all of the pages to do user sign up, user login, user registration. Yes, you still have to skin them to some degree to make them look like, kind of how that particular site looks. But in terms of the actual functionality of creating a table with all the right fields and having all the sort of logic for how do you know if a user's logged in and if they're not logged in and all that kind of stuff, that's all kind of provided by these packages instead.
I just realized I never actually clicked go live over on the YouTube site. So once again, this is Mubs. on the
Hello,
recording,
everyone.
it'll all seem smooth and there was no problems. But as we all know, live streams a little finicky. But yeah, if you're watching this, you feel free to post questions in the chat for Mubs. I shared some links already, so you can check out some of the stuff he's worked on, and we'll be pulling questions from there. And I'll be asking a ton of my own as well.
Awesome.
So maybe let's start at the beginning. How did you get started shipping products and like being an indie maker / full-time employed engineer?
So I've been interested in software and computers since I was about 8 years old. So I've been doing this for a really long time. Went to school for it, and then got a job doing, as a software engineer straight out of university and everything. And then just employed and working pretty full time. I'd say I did my first side project in 2000 was my first side project, and it was just so again I have to sometimes when I talk about side projects I have to talk about context in terms of what the time was, because going back to 2000 now, so I think my first side project back then was for a way for me to track, or it was a new way to kind of show. So I'm a big Premier League soccer fan because I grew up in England. And so back again, going back to 2000, it was very hard to keep a track of like what teams had played, who was playing next, which next week who would you be playing, how well is your team doing in terms of how far the season's along and sort of all that kind of stuff. Nowadays it's on ESPN and BBC Sports sites and all, it's kind of everywhere now, but back in 2000 it's very hard to kind of figure all that stuff out. So I built a website that kind of helped me make that a lot easier, just to kind of see what the standings were, who we still had left to play, and sort of all this kind of fun stuff. So it was just a fun little thing that I built just to kind of make it easier for me to follow the sort of team that I supported. And that was the first one, and I built it and I launched it and I pushed it out, and then I just kept making more things like that, where I was like, oh god, this is really hard to do, this is painful, like I can make this easier. And over the years, is like, if you do look over the sort of stuff that I built in terms of side projects and things, a large number of those are, god, why is this so hard to do? Why is this information so hard to find? We do have the technology that can make this a lot easier. Why hasn't somebody made this? Okay, nobody's made this, I'm going to make this.
What's your current pace in terms of projects per month or per year?
I go through spurts. There'll be sometimes when I'm just, I'm working at my job, so I'm really snowed, and I don't do much of anything kind of on side projects, just kind of, making sure that the stuff that I have still works and is still kind of up and running and stuff. And then there'll be other months where I put out 2 or 3 projects, just because I've taken some time off works occasionally, and I'm just like, I'm bored. And so yeah, and also I like doing hackathons as well. So I'll take a weekend to go at a hackathon, and I can make and finish and launch a sort of application in that sort of hackathon period, which is like a weekend usually. So yeah, so it depends, but on average, it's probably about 1 a month-ish, I would say.
Looking back now, so we're like 20 years from you starting to ship. Looking back over the last 20 years, what have been, what do you consider your greatest hits, or the projects you had the most fun building?
I mean, the one that went like the widest and got like the most, number of page views and stuff was, so 3 years back, I built a site called Will Robots Take My Job.com. That's literally the domain name, the sort of name of the website and everything like that. I built it with a friend of mine. Well, I'll say a friend. We never met, but I still consider him a friend. But he lives in Bulgaria, and he kind of had this idea to kind of to build this website based off of a report that came out a few years earlier than that from the University of Oxford or Cambridge, I forget which one, but yeah, so they did all of the research in terms of like what is the percentage likelihood that a job will be kind of automated away either through AI or robotics or whatever it is, and could a machine do the actual job that you have now? So they published this report, and it was like a 300 long page report. And nobody was going to read it, but he found it and kind of skimmed over it and found like the actual output that they put out, which is basically just kind of like a spreadsheet about, here's the job and here's the percentage likelihood that it would be automated away. And so we took that report and we kind of made it into a site that people could search easily and showed the information. We kind of added in some extra information about that particular job, about how many people had that job, what the average pay of that particular job was, kind of things like that, just to kind of augment what was in that kind of report. And we built it in a couple of weekends. And in the first week, it had 4 million page views. It was just, it was one of those things. It was just the right time. There's the kind of thing that people were really interested in kind of at the time, because AI and kind of automation was a big concern. I think it still is. And yeah, so it was on national TV, on like news reports in Canada and in France, and it was on radio and TV all over the country here in the States as well. And yeah, it did amazingly well. It did a lot of page views. I think we sold it 18 months after we actually launched it, just because we didn't know what to do with the site. It was just one of these very specific, answer a very specific question kind of thing. But it had done 14 million page views by the time that we had sold it.
A lot of so if you go onto Mubs, like iworkedon.com website, you'll see they all have like a status. So active, sold, autopilot, zombie. How do you decide what turns into a zombie, what gets sold, or what goes on autopilot?
Yeah, I mean, with the autopilot ones, they're kind of meant to be autopilot, right? Like they're just websites that kind of update themselves, through APIs or whatever, or they go scrape some information from some particular place and add it to some other information and then kind of make it available. So the ones that are on kind of autopilot, I specifically, even in some cases when I start them, I kind of think about, I'm only going to make this if I can autopilot, because if I can't, it's going to take too much time to kind of update it manually. And if I can't find a way to kind of put this information together in some kind of automated fashion, it's just not worth the effort to kind of make a site like this. The zombie ones are an interesting one, because it's those ones are like a lot older, that I didn't really think about automation when I really started working on them, and so it's very hard to go back and kind of fully automate them now. And so those are ones that just, I did maintain for a while. Like I maintained for a year or two, and then, after a while you just run out of steam essentially, and you just can't update them. You just don't have the time to kind of update them all. But you don't want to take the site down because you worked hard on it, and you still want it to be up there and still and kind of still exist. So if people want to find kind of old information, it's still helpful information. So those are the ones that kind of end up being that kind of zombie where it's like, I should kill it, but I don't feel like I can. And then the ones that get sold, I mean, I don't actively really look to sell a lot of projects, because like I said, most of them are just kind of hobby things that I build because I'm scratching my own itch, or I want to answer my own question. But once you do put stuff out there, people do just randomly ask you, like, would you be interested in selling this site? And usually the answer is yes, because I'm like, I don't know what to do with this thing anymore. So usually do end up selling them when people do ask, and not make a completely insane offer. As long as somebody's reasonable in terms of how much they're offering and stuff, then I'm not usually too tied to a project not to sell it. I'm usually too tied to a project to shut it down and to take it offline. But yeah, I'm usually quite happy to see somebody take a project over from me and do and to take it up to the next level, because it just kind of, it's just another way of saying that it was a good idea, right? So, and who doesn't want to have a good idea out there?
How do you determine what's a fair price for a side project?
Yeah, that's a tough one. I mean, obviously it depends on if you're trying to make money from it. Like if it's a subscription based product that you've built on the side and you're trying to make money from it. I mean, I think it's just a matter of like, well, how well have you done? Like, how many people do you have signed up? If it's something that you're actually trying to make money from, then the money that you're making will kind of tell you how correct you are and what the value of that particular thing is. It's much harder if you're not trying to make money from something, right? Like, because what's the value of your work that you haven't really tried to kind of generate revenue from instead? So those kind of vary. I mean, like in some instances, you still have to look at like, okay, well, how much traction do you have? How many visitors do you get? What's your SEO score on kind of popular terms and things like that. And you kind of just have to put, it's kind of a gut feeling in that case, in terms of like, how long and how expensive would it be for somebody else to try and do the same thing that I did? And if you're like, well, it took me a year to get here, it would probably take somebody else 6 months to get here. How much is 6 months time of somebody's time's worth? And then you just kind of have to eyeball that and say, it's X number of, it's X $1,000 or $10,000 or $20,000. I mean, you just that one is very hard to do, but yeah, I think so. Yes, I think it does depend a little bit on if you've actually tried to make money from it, and if you haven't, it gets even more complicated.
Could you give a couple examples of like a project and how you decided how much it was worth?
So. I said the most recent one that I sold was actually a website called For Sale by Maker, and so I built For Sale by Maker during a hackathon. So it was actually an online hackathon. It lasted a month. I think I spent about a week on actually building out the actual application, and it was just funny because it's a website to sell other sites. So but it was completely free. I hadn't tried to make any money off of it or anything like that. I mean, I was a little bit tired of people just like throwing together a landing page and then trying to sell it. So I came up with this idea of well, how about we tie the sort of marketplace in terms of, I've got a site to sell, but you tie it to something like Product Hunt. So it used the Product Hunt API as a way to source the things that you could post on here. So if it hadn't been featured on Product Hunt, you couldn't list it on this particular site. And so it used the APIs and everything like that. It was built as part of a product on hackathon that they had actually started. And so it didn't cost anything. It was just kind of a way for me to kind of use their API and just kind of see how just kind of see how it would work. But it was also like it was kind of like an interesting question, like, can you use the product API as an indicator of this is actually a kind of interesting site based on the number of upvotes it had received and kind of things like that. And it was a way to filter out just people just making a stupid site and just throwing it together and then just trying to sell it instead. So I built that, and I didn't really do anything with it. I mean, people were still like finding it because it was listed on Product Hunt and stuff. So people were still posting their sites on it. And then about a year after I had launched that site, somebody reached out and was like, I basically just like, were you interested in selling this site? And I was like, yes, because I wasn't really planning on like turning it into like a big marketplace or anything like that. It was just it was just kind of a fun little experiment just to kind of see if it would work in terms of a way to kind of filter stuff out. And then it was, because people were actually, occasionally people would just send me a message to say, oh, I listed my site on your site and somebody asked me to buy it. So I was like, that's fantastic, so it was still, I mean, it wasn't doing a lot of sales or anything like that, but I'd get one message every couple of months or so, just randomly, people who'd like listed their site, and then somebody had found it and they had acquired it. So it was obviously working, but it wasn't something I was spending a lot of time on or anything like that. And I literally hadn't touched it in 8 or 9 months. Like, I literally hadn't looked at the code or anything like that. So I was like, yes, I'm interested in it, but I'm like, I have no idea how to put like a value on this thing, because I'm not trying to make money from it, and I'm not spending any time on it either. So you can't even like estimate it. Like, well, it would take somebody X number, it would take them 300 hours to recreate what I've done, because I hadn't spent 300 hours on it. So it was funny because when I was trying to figure out how much to kind of like put a price on this thing, I was like, well, my laptop's starting to get a little bit old, and it would be nice to get a new laptop. And so I just messaged Andrew, who was the person who ended up acquiring the site. I was like, how about you sell it to me for the price of a new MacBook Pro, because I've been an Apple user for a long time. And so that was how we came up with the price of the website. Was we went to Apple, looked at how much a MacBook Pro would cost, and we were like, okay, that's it. That's how much I would like for this particular site instead. And so I mean, it kind of worked out. I mean, it ended up being roughly $3,000 for this particular site. And when, like I said, when you kind of think about, I mean, one, I think it's one of the things I don't know if it's a good return. But, I'd spend, like I said, maybe I'd spent like a week on it, like part-time, not like, not working like an entire week. It was just kind of like a few hours each kind of evening to kind of build out this site. And I probably spent, I'd probably spent in total probably 30 hours kind of working kind of on the site. And so, it's like $3,000, even if I'm fairly reasonably charging my hourly rate, that's not so bad. And so it kind of seemed like a fair return on the amount of time that I'd kind of spent on it as well.
Have there been any where you regretted selling it or became envious of what it became after?
No, I don't think so. I mean, there's some projects on here that I built with other people with the express intention of just kind of helping them start out. Like, I built a site called Q, so QUUU .co is the actual site. And so that was built with the express intention of just kind of helping some friends of mine start their kind of startup, as it were. So I worked on it for about a year, kind of on and off. And I'm still, a small minority interest holder in Q. But there's like 7 people who work on it full time now. It's profitable. It makes money. So it's that was the intention, that I would work on it for some amount of time, and then they would hire people to kind of help them, and they have hired an engineer to kind of help them with the sort of everyday operations and kind of everything like that. So there's probably 2 or 3 projects like that, sort of in the sort of in the backlog there, that was kind of the whole idea, was that I would kind of help people start, and then they would take over and carry on with them.
And then, so do you feel like, oh man, this is doing really well, I wish I had joined full time? Or are you just like, oh cool, it's doing well, glad to see my mark on the world?
No, I mean, like I said, I've still got a minority share in it, so hopefully if they do sell for 100, if they become a unicorn at some point, that will kind of work out. But no, I mean, I think that was an option that I had kind of at the time. Like I spoke with them, and they said, look, you've been doing this thing in weekends and evenings, would you like to do it full time? And sort of at the time, I had a full-time job at the time that I was quite happy with, and kind of everything worked out well. And so I said no, I can't. I'm not really interested in transitioning over. And like I said, it's all worked out kind of well, I think. And I know, so I haven't had any regrets up to this point anyway.
As long as you're living a good life and doing what you enjoy, it's hard to regret things too much, I feel.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about it earlier, but living in upstate New York, it's it's not like I'm living in San Francisco, in the middle of the sort of internet or the sort of startup scene. It's so, I've chosen a kind of lifestyle, which prioritize a few other things rather than being part of a really hot startup and being that kind of lifestyle. So and I think it's worked out well for me. Like I've it's funny because, well, it's not funny, but it's just interesting, I should say, that people panicked this year when it was like, oh my god, what do you mean I have to work from home? I've been working from home for 20 odd years, so this whole like being locked down and not being able to be in an office, for me it was like, this is normal.
No change noted.
And for a lot, no, I was like, I still wake up and walk downstairs and I'm in my office. I've been doing that for around 20 odd years now, so it wasn't really a big change for me. And again, that was a choice that I made. It was like, I have some options to kind of work in and stay in New York City. Had some offers to go back to San Francisco instead, and I was like, you know what, I want to do the white picket fence and the house and the yard and the kids, and I couldn't see that really working out well in New York City or in San Francisco, so I kind of made that sort of choice, and I'm quite happy with that.
That's a good advertisement for upstate New York. Underrated. You can buy a house.
It is.
It's quite nice. You still have access to a lot. It's not hard to get to the city or to Boston or even up to Montreal or anything. But
absolutely, and that was, I was working with an agency down in New York City, and so once a month I would hop on the train. It takes 2 hours to get into the city, and they were happy to see me, and but then I was happy to hop on the train and head and just kind of head home as well.
Once you get north of Albany, it gets a little harder. The trains become less dependable.
Certainly
so
do.
Where's your focus at nowadays? Where's most of your time going?
Yeah, so it's kind of interesting that you kind of talked about like regrets and things like that, because I think about 18 months ago I got introduced to Nathan, Latka through some friends I have in Austin, and so we just started doing fun side projects, just kind of hacking on stuff again in weekends and evenings while I had a full-time job, and then those all just kind of turned into something called FounderPath. And so earlier this year, I decided I was going to stop doing all the other things that I was doing in terms of full-time job and stuff, and I was going to go work with Nathan instead. And so my main focus for a while now has been working on FounderPath, which is what's the best way to describe it? So FounderPath is a way for SaaS companies to get funding without necessarily having to give up any part of their equity or to give away seats on their board or anything like that. So it lets founders keep control of their company, but also still get access to capital. So if they want to hire to, just to grow the company or spend on kind of advertising and stuff, but they need that capital up front, they can come to us and we'll kind of look at how well they're doing in terms of their SaaS business, in terms of what their MRR is, what their revenue retention rate is, what their churn rate is, what their LTV. We do a very deep dive into how kind of healthy we think they are, and then kind of based on that we can lend them capital to kind of help them do whatever they want to do, but then not take any equity or so just so they can keep a control over their own startup.
What pushed you to say like, yeah, for sure, I'm going to join FounderPath?
I just like working with Nathan a lot. So, and I think that's the sort of advantage of having worked on a bunch of like little side projects with him too, just to kind of get a real sense of what kind of person he was, what kind of, how he likes to work and kind of things like that. I put a pretty big emphasis on that in terms of like, even when I was taking full-time work in the past, it's like, well, what's it going to be like to work at that particular company, work within the sort of team that I'd be working in, kind of what's the work day look like, what are the people like, Yes, I think because the quality of life thing, which is impacted hugely by who you work with, I think is still hugely important and an underappreciated aspect of kind of choosing where you want to work. So that to me was the first signal. Like if kind of had I said I don't like working with Nathan, then obviously the answer would have been no. I don't want to. I don't want to be on FounderPath. I think, and then sort of after that, you just kind of look at kind of what is the sort of mission of FounderPath, what's the opportunity for FounderPath as well, and again, I love what the sort of mission of FounderPath is, like in terms of opening up access to capital for healthy SaaS companies is really awesome. I think the sort of number of SaaS companies is only going to increase, especially in the middle of the pandemic year. We've had a lot more people had an opportunity to kind of start new things as well. So I think the sort of number of SaaS companies will just kind of increase. It's the new mom and pop store that was on the main street. Now you've got lots of indie makers out there who are starting SaaS companies that are really awesome pieces of software that really needed to exist, and now people have had the opportunity to actually start them. So I think as a kind of industry segment, it's kind of a fantastic opportunity, I think, in the future. And I think the sort of plans that Nathan outlined, after we started kind of talking about a lot of that stuff really made sense, and it really clicked with me. So that I think that ultimately was kind of why I said absolutely yes.
And since we dropped the name a couple times, for people that don't know, Nathan runs a really big podcast called The Top Entrepreneurs. He also does a bunch of other stuff too. He's got like a book and stuff. So I shared a link. You can check that out after this. Stay tuned. So what is your like ideal life look like? what does it look like over the next 5 years, say?
Oh, no, I mean, I honestly, just the same as what it is now. I mean, I'm very happy working from home. I'm very happy. I have a very flexible schedule. Like, I mean, I'll say I've never had a problem like motivating myself to work. I'm a workaholic, and I'm quite happy and quite honest about that with anybody who asks. My wife and kids are well aware that I love to work, but I also love to spend time with them as well. But it's not always quantity that just because you're in the same room, just because you're just in the same room as somebody doesn't mean that you're really spending time with them. And I think we do that well, in terms of we kind of all like to do our own things, but when we spend some time together, we spend some time together. And so I think over the next 5 years, if my life didn't really change much at all, I'd be quite happy.
That's a great place to be. And you seem like quite a satisfied fella as well. Like, living a good life.
Yeah, I mean, look, I mean, I was even though I like working hard, like I've never really liked to be part of the rat race and chase the unicorn startup or anything like that. I've had lots of opportunities to go back to New York City, work on Wall Street even, and make lots of money working down there and stuff. And it was just I found out where I'm happy, and doing what I like to do. And I think I just made that choice that what. It was much more important for me to be happy and have the kind of life that I wanted than just to go chase a dream that people think they have. But really, just chasing something because everybody else is chasing the same thing. But ultimately, it's not really what people want. I think usually people are chasing it so that they can get the freedom to do the thing that they really want to do. And I was like, well, why can't I just do the thing I want to do? Why do I have to go chase something first?
How do you balance your time between your full-time job, all these side projects, your family who you love and care for as well?
No, so I mean, I think this whole idea of like work-life balance is not. I just don't. I mean, yes, over your life, you want to make sure you have a work life. You kind of have a well-balanced work-life thing. But the idea that you're going to work, every week you're going to work a certain amount of hours, and and you're going to spend a certain amount of time of hours with your family and friends and stuff. It's just kind of artificial, right? Like, what is the perfect balance, right? Like, is it working for 8 hours and then spending hours with your family? Is it working 7 hours and spending 9 hours with your family? And like, what is it? And I think it's going to be different for everybody anyway, right? Like, because some people are going to want to work more, some people are going to some people don't have a family, so like, how do you do that? And so I think the idea is that you do the things that make you happy. And if you're happy and you're spending more time at work and fewer hours with your family, as long as your family's happy with that too,
also key.
Then that's okay, right? Like, it doesn't, also key. Make sure your family's happy with the kind of whatever you make sure that yes, and I think that's also the key, right? Like, having conversations and actually speaking with other people kind of in your life and kind of making sure that everybody's happy too. So I mean, I think. It's weird. Like, there'll be some times where I don't make stuff kind of in weekends and evenings and stuff because I just don't feel like it, or I'm spending time with the family. And then there's going to be other months where I'm like, I'm going to be away for the next 3 weekends because I'm at hackathons. It's just like, but as long as you're kind of having that conversation with your family and they're kind of aware of what's happening and why it's happening, and yes, I'm going to be really busy for the next month because we're launching a new version of the website. I'll see you in a month, kind of thing. That I think that's okay. And I think people people understand that as long as they know why, and kind of as long as they kind of appreciate that. I mean, ultimately, you're doing it for them too. Like, if I'm putting a lot of hours into FounderPath, and yes, I'm working a lot, and hopefully in the long term, the payback will be there as well.
So how do you decide what to work on in the first place? Where do you find inspiration?
Yeah, I mean, like I think a lot of my projects are just like I mentioned earlier, just kind of scratching my own itch, right? Like, I mean, like in kind of a lot of the cases, it's I'm trying to do whatever it is, whether it's at the day job or if it's in my personal life, where it's like, well, why is this so hard? Like, software was supposed to make life easier for us. It was, software was going to eat the world, and everything was going to be easy, and we were going to be able to do. We're supposed to have flying cars right now as well, but we haven't quite got to that point yet. But yeah, I mean, like, software was supposed to just kind of make our lives easier, and it was supposed to make us more productive and sort of all of these things. And I think ultimately that's really what I try and do, is like, why is that hard? Why am I filling out the same form 100 times? Why am I doing these things manually over and over again when I could automate it? If I can, I mean, I think one of the first sites I built was this thing called Host Inspired. Then again, this is going back to 2001, I think. Every morning I would wake up. I was a webmaster back then, I guess you'd call it. And so CSS was fairly new back then, and there was all of these design galleries that would highlight, oh, here's a really awesome looking website that was built with CSS. And so every morning there was probably about 4 or 5 of these that I would just open up the tab to, okay, let's go visit that one to see what they posted. And then you open the next one, and you open the next one. And after a few days or weeks of this, I was like, well, this is a bit insane. Like, they're a website, they have RSS feeds, so why am I opening up each one of these websites and finding out what they posted so I can have a look at it? So I built a website that aggregated all of those sites, it took the RSS feed from each of those and put it onto one page, and then it could also kind of figure out, okay, well, this site was actually featured on these 3 of these galleries as well, so it kind of did some extra kind of smart stuff that I was having to do manually kind of in the past. And so, yeah, I built a website that just kind of aggregated all that information into one place. Now I just had one site to go visit every morning. Happened to be a site that I built. So that made it even more fun. So, yes, I just look for things that, either I'm doing or I see other people do, that I'm like, well, why are people wasting their time doing the same thing over and over again, when we can automate a lot of stuff like this as well.
By stalking you through to Most Inspired, I discovered Suffix Software. Is that how you structure
yes.
the friend wants me to help them launch a startup kind of deals?
Yeah. I mean, I think I incorporated in 2004, I think. No, probably a little bit after that. But no, I was also doing freelancing and consulting stuff in kind of weekends and evenings as well. And so, yeah, so I kind of incorporate Suffix Software as a way to kind of separate, my kind of work and my personal finances as well. And then, yeah, so if there's, I mean, basically everything's owned by Suffix Software until it's not. And then, like I said, if I ever do any freelancing or consulting or kind of anything like that kind of all runs through Suffix Software as well.
That's a pro move for anybody getting started. You want some kind of liability shielding. You want some kind of separation between your personal finances and everything else. But is it really worth it to set up a separate entity for every single project when you don't know which ones are going to be big?
Right.
Probably not.
Right.
Cover your butt maybe with some business insurance if you're really worried before.
Yeah, and I think just having one entity, I mean, obviously it depends on what state you live in and what the actual legal requirements you kind of have and stuff. But you can typically just file as so have one kind of umbrella corporation, but then you just file a DBA for each of your projects as well, so you can still officially be referred to as whichever project it is, but ultimately financially it's still owned by this sort of umbrella instead. It gets a little bit more complicated if obviously if you've got lots of different partners and things like that in terms of people working with you and stuff. Again, like I said, it depends. That's all depending on where they live and what country they live in and what state they live in and all that kind of stuff too. Definitely talk to an attorney if it's going to get much more complicated than that. I also think a lot of people worry about that too much as well. Like, I mean, people want to get all that stuff sorted out before they even start working on sort of anything as well. Realistically, you don't need to worry about that stuff until you're ready to launch something, at least. So at least get to the point where you've worked on something and you have something that may or may not make money. And because for a lot of people that would take 3 or 6 months or whatever it is. So if you're going to incorporate and you're going to spend the money to incorporate and set up a bank, and you're going to have that sort of you're going to have that expense with you. Even if you fail to kind of actually finish it and actually fail to kind of launch it, now you got to pay to kind of wind that down and all that kind of stuff too. So at least wait till you're absolutely certain that you will have something that you're going to actually have to kind of launch. You can, verbal contract or kind of email contract which just says everybody owns 30% of this, or everybody, everybody owns 20% of this. And we're going to put the rest in, we're going to lock it away until we actually launch this thing. You can have the conversation about how you want to structure things, about if sort of everybody owns everything equally, or if you're going to split things based on how much people are working. If some people are working full time, some people aren't working full time, you can split things however you want to. Just make sure everybody's on the same page with that. Send an email around just to make sure everybody's on the same page, and you have you kind of have it. You kind of have that historical record of everybody agreed to this. That's legally binding at that point. You don't need to have an incorporation. You don't need to have a company set up to kind of make that stuff be, legal and stuff. And then once you get to the point where it's, okay, now we need to incorporate because we are charging customers and we need insurance, you can take that contract effectively that you all agreed to and use that as the sort of starting point of your enterprise as well.
Yeah, it's really hard to have liability if you aren't making any money, so might as well go make the money first. Then you can afford the lawyer fees.
Yeah, and plus in sort of a lot of places you kind of have to pay annual fees as well. So let's say it's 2020 right now, but it's December. Like, why incorporate now? Because you're gonna have to pay fees in 2020 and pay them in 2021. If you just wait till 2021 when you're actually ready to launch, then you'll skip the fees for 2020 as well. But like I said, I mean, this is not legal advice because I'm not a lawyer. But absolutely, think about. It's obviously it's a little bit different for me launching so many different projects, but I think people find really early on that you kind of overestimate. Your first project is likely not going to be the one that will be a massive corporation that will make lots of money and things like that. So have fun making your side projects, have fun working on them until you're kind of sure that they will become the thing that you want to work on kind of all the time, and you are going to make money, and then you can make them less fun afterwards.
And if it does get big, you can always spin it off. Like, there's nothing stopping you from doing that, and it gets a lot easier when you can afford it.
Yeah, when you can afford to speak to an attorney, things get much easier.
They get easier and harder and more stressful at the same time. Yes.
Yes. Well, I mean, I think, like I said, I think it's important to have the conversation about what the incorporation should look like. Who's going to own what percentage, and who's going to put in what monies and all that kind of stuff. That's the hardest bit, right? Like the actual part of actually filing the incorporation papers and setting up a company and all that kind of stuff. That's easy. Yes, it can be expensive and stuff. I think the bit that people really hate to do is to actually have that conversation with people, because I think if people usually run into problems when they incorporate after they've actually started the company and stuff, is because they haven't had that conversation with everybody in terms of what does the ownership structure look like. I think if you've had that conversation, then it doesn't really matter when you incorporate. If you fail to have the conversation, that's why people like to incorporate early, because then it forces them to have the conversation about what the corporate structure is and more specifically what the sort of ownership structure looks like. But I think if you have the conversation, then there's no actual need to incorporate until you actually have some stuff stuff that you can actually charge customers for
Save
as well.
Even more headache by just not having any friends or co-founders.
Just work by yourself. Yeah, absolutely. That's the best way. It might take you a little bit longer, but I think I mean, look, I built a lot of projects on my own, and I find, the sort of first few might take you a little bit longer because you have to learn some of the skills that you don't actually have yet. I think once you've picked those skills up, I find that's the other reason people are like, Mubs, how do you launch stuff so fast? It's like, because I do it all myself. Like, it takes me longer to kind of explain to people, here's my vision, here's my thoughts, here's what I'm thinking, what the website's going to look like, and how you get from this page to this page. And, in the time it took me to explain all of that stuff to somebody, I could have made the thing myself.
Yeah.
It's like, I mean, ultimately, that's the real speed. There really is a big argument for, if you're going to spike something, if you're going to make a prototype, you're going to make an MVP of something, do it yourself. Yes, if you then kind of like, okay, I really do want to turn this into a corporation, I want this to turn this into something real that will exist for many years, find somebody who will help you. At that point, I think it's easier to find people to help you anyway, because you can actually show them a functioning thing, a functioning application. This is my vision, not just a vision on a piece of paper or just kind of in my head, but a real functioning thing. I think it's much easier to kind of find people to kind of work with you if you have something tangible, I think, as well.
For sure. There's so much time lost sometimes trying to communicate your ideas. Like, obviously there's no one shoe fits all solution here. And if you do already have like a good friendship with a designer and you're the developer, like, that can be great, right? You can build a great project that way, or a great business.
Yeah, I mean, especially if you're already working with them, right? Like, if you're already in the same office with them, if you're already kind of working on kind of other stuff with them, just spending your lunch hour talking about this other thing that you might want to work on kind of weekends and evenings is really kind of an awesome way to kind of split up your work day anyway. But it's finding those people is really, really hard. But if you're fortunate enough to have found somebody like that, absolutely try and stick with it. But it's still then, kind of everybody has their own schedule, has their own availability, has their own thing, and trying to get everybody synced up on the same thing. I think that's the bit that I think, because it's not even so much that it takes long to do that thing, but it's, when are you going to have the time to do that thing, right? So, and like I said, if you're fortunate, that you're both, sort of all the people are in the same situation, either they haven't got kids or they have got kids, but they're all kind of working on the same schedule, then that's fantastic. But like I said, it's very, very rare that you find that.
And trying to build it yourself can be a good way to find someone with the complementary skills, because by trying to go get those skills yourself, you're going to find yourself in the company of the people that already have them naturally, and it can be a more organic way to like build those kind of partnerships, I feel.
Yeah, and I think it's, I mean, I tell people, people ask me a lot of times, should I learn how to code so I can make this thing myself? I'm like, just learn what you need to learn, the fundamentals of learning how to code. Not because you necessarily not necessarily because you want to sit there and write code all day long, but how do you even know if somebody's a good coder? If you don't know anything about how to write code or what code looks like or anything like that, how can you tell if this person that you're talking to who wants to come on and be your technical co-founder, how do you know if they're actually any good? And the same applies to kind of other things, like how do you know if somebody's good at sales, how do you know if somebody's good at marketing? If you don't know how to do sales, if you don't know what is involved in doing sales or marketing, how do you know if the person you're speaking to knows what they're talking about? And so I think the more that you learn about all the different parts of kind of what it takes, to kind of run a successful company. We'll just help you hire or to find co-founders who are actually really, really good. And that's ultimately, that is your biggest strength, especially at a startup. Yes, you can say, yes, we're a software company, so we write, so the whole point is to write good software. But really, your sort of strength and weaknesses at any kind of early stage company is the quality of the people who are actually working there.
And I forget who said this or what it's even called, but there's like this concept of you can only tell if somebody is like as good or worse at you at some skill. It's very hard to tell how much better somebody is at a skill than you if you don't have that same level of skill. Yeah. So get a little bit, then at least you've raised your floor for the kind of people you're going to work with.
Yeah, I mean, and I mean, always start small as well. That's the other thing I tell people as well. It's like, start small because, one, you don't want to commit to something that's going to take a year without really knowing if the person you're working with has the same personality that you want to work with, has the same kind of drive that you want to work with as well. It's very easy to get into a relationship. It's very hard to get out of a relationship. So if you start small, it's much easier to get out of that relationship because there's a natural end to it. You can just say, look, we made that one little small thing that we said we were going to work on, and I don't want to do anything else.
We're already getting close to the hour. Do you have advice for like the beginner indie maker, somebody starting out? What should they be keeping in mind?
Yeah, I mean, I think just starting small. I mean, I think people have this whole like impression that, the first thing they're going to make is something the size of Facebook or, some of these other big, large companies out there. And I think they forget that they've been around for so many years. And when they launched, they weren't anything like they are right now. So, focus on doing small things. And then, if there's some traction with that small thing, continue to add features to it, continue to improve it, and just kind of launch it and kind of iterate on it as fast as you can, rather than trying to launch with this big massive thing. And I think that's where a lot of people fall into trouble, is because they just never launch because they're always trying to build the big thing instead of trying to build the small thing and kind of launch really fast and launch often as well.
Are there people who you're following right now that you really admire, or like folks that we should all be checking out?
No, I mean, I hang out a lot on the sort of indiehackers.com forum, and there's a lot of people on there who are doing a lot of amazing things. Not that you'll read about on any popular, TechCrunch or anything like that. There's a lot of people doing amazing stuff. But also just keep in mind that you could be up there too. Like, I mean, it's not the sort of the sort of obstacles that used to be in your way. Like, if you wanted to build and launch something, the sort of amount of money that you needed to be able to build and launch something these days, it's very easy to build and launch something. It's much harder to kind of scale it, but it's not. It just to get started at least is really, really easy these days. And so it's just a matter of I always find it's a matter of finding the right thing to work on these days is harder than actually doing the thing. And for me, like I said, that's kind of always been scratching my own itch. So as long as I know I'm solving a problem for myself, and I'm fairly confident that other people have that same issue as well, then I think that's a good place to start as well. And I think the other thing to keep in mind is that most ideas pivot in some way or other. Like, most companies will kind of change from kind of what they originally planned to what they what you really know what they're really awesome for right now. Even if you look at something like Google, really awesome search engine, right? Like, they do really well with search. It wasn't till Go2 came out with a way to actually make money, really effectively make money from search engine placement and rankings and things that Google started to do really well. And then, they spun out, they did Gmail and a whole bunch of other applications and stuff, and they make, a lot more money from there than they do from their search engines as well. And even with Facebook, right? I mean, like, they started out as a way to put pictures of your classmates online. That was it. That's the first version of Facebook. It was an online yearbook, effectively. And now they've got a social network with close to 2 billion people on it as well. So, just because you start doing one thing, it doesn't mean that you have to stick with that one thing either.
Lovely. Mubs, it was a pleasure. Yeah. Thank you so much for coming. To learn more about Mubs, to find all these links, check out mubs.me. Also check out founderpath.com if you're looking to scale and need some money. Mubs, any parting words for us? Any last things?
No, just also, I mean, I tend to hang out mostly on Twitter as well. So if you're interested in following along, or if you have any questions as well, you can just send me a message on Twitter, and I'm happy to help.
And if you're watching the recording, the link to Mubs' Twitter and everything else will be in the description.